This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the Antoine Dupont of website builders.
What a year it's been, huh? Test Rugby currently has more good teams than at any point in the sport's history. Yet, just how good so many of those good sides are seems to change near weekly, round on round. We don't know. Are Italy going to be world beaters this week? Will Argentina shit the bed or win by 50? Are the Springboks going to somehow get even better? The answer to that one's probably yes. But every week we find ourselves asking the same questions with new intonation. Even Wales headed into this year in a reasonably good place. Yet the flying, changing, wildly unsure stock situation has affected few more than Ireland and Australia over 2024. The Wallabies ended this year at rock bottom, yet 10 days ago looked on track for a first European Grand Slam in 40 years, and Ireland sat at the world #1 spot for a decent chunk of this year, but now look more vulnerable than ever. These are two teams on very different, very unclear trajectories, and on Saturday they met in the middle in a match a month ago we would have considered a foregone conclusion. Yet we saw the even-handed, level-pegging game we now expected, a late Irish try eventually deciding a pretty excellent test match. So, how did Ireland come out on top? Are Australia just on the up and up? Where are they going from here? And what can we make from either team now that 2024 is coming to a close? I think the best way to sum up and, indeed, praise this Wallaby performance on Saturday is this. If you pulled an average rugby fan aside, let's call him Pete McBrown, he's 36, drives a Land Rover and supports Bristol Bears, and showed him this game with both sets of players blanked out in generic uniforms, then asked him which team do you think is Ireland and which do you think is Australia, there's a pretty good chance our Pete, our best friend, would assume the side scoring tries like this and defending ferociously up in the line like this were wearing green. The Wallabies are becoming quite a beautiful thing at the moment. Joe Schmidt balancing his trademark organised tactics and set shapes with a less structured, more open, traditionally Australian style of play. Sensible rugby played with adventure and optimism. This set is so simple, yet plays to the 15 on the field's inherent skills beautifully. A gap opens up briefly for Lolaseo here, but they don't panic, even when there's no forwards around the corner, having been involved in the scrums in successive phases. Ikitau just fills in perfectly, plays as a flanker to get them some gain line as Lolaseo gets back to his feet and makes a great spot. With Ireland short numbers out wide, Bundy Arkey here has had to reload and get across to that far side, and it leaves Porter here having to adjust last second to fill two player spots. This causes him to briefly disconnect from James Ryan, and so Lolaseo takes it himself. Ryan bites in without calling, leaving him now disconnected in turn from Byrne, opening a hole. Tupou and Valentini start running lovely lines, sliding from one guy in support into two realistic options. Last second, going straight for a gap and almost creating a try, but for Bobby V's backhand pass being off target. Ultimately, Arkey being here behind the defensive line saves the try, but spotting where he is in the first place and the stress it can put on the lock filling his role is what opens the chance in the first place. Without needing to be Eddie's overambitious positionless rugby mate, it feels like Schmidt has empowered his current team, as he did his green team before them, to just be rugby players, trusting everyone to do any job, and yet still imbuing his team with the trademark sneaky strategies and smart new moves. Ireland lost just 6 lineouts across the full 5 games in their victorious Six Nations campaign earlier this year. They lost 4 on Saturday, which is as bad as I could find over the last 5 years, going through quite a few of their games. And yet so much of that just comes down to some cheeky sneakery from Schmidt and his golden boys. This is Ireland's first line out of the game. Rob Valentini here enters late. He occasionally jumps on Wallaby ball, but never on opposition really, so Ireland have no reason to watch him. The ball goes to caller Ryan at the tail, who beats Frost in front and chucks the ball down towards Gibson Park, except it isn't Gibson Park. Valentini, mid-lift, breaks off and floods through this gap to intercept the ball. Now, this going beyond the 15 metre means there's no offside line anymore, but this is legal regardless if you get the timing right. Watch Frost here wait at the tail for the split second he'll be onside, waiting to get right in Craig Case's prepubescent face. Tail gunning like that is nothing new, but having the lifter shoot out is kind of genius. Frost here again lifts, but instead of bringing his dude to ground, just lets go to jump in Gibson Park's face, getting a shove to the shoulder which prompts a shocking pass from a guy in contention to be the world's best egg lobber. Massively shifting pods is a huge part of how Ireland run their set piece. Units shuffling back and forth, but Australia targeted the gap between their jumpers that this creates, such a small part of their game, yet it had a huge knock-on effect. Ireland had no choice to adapt, because otherwise the risk was either making these intercepts or just getting to Gibson Park consistently. The most basic version of this was shown on a lineup that we barely saw because they were showing this close-up of Sam Prendergast again, and typical bloody Dublin, Leinster bias media. And then this replay, so we can spend more time marvelling at how Max Jorgensen here looks like Hugh McGregor caught with baby chimp. But hey, Doris and Byrne physically block Frost whilst McCarthy pulls back Wilson. This is something you can get away with a few times, but try and do this at every single line-out with referees as hot on blockers as they are right now, and you risk giving away a penalty, especially with Harry Wilson in the referee's ear all day. So instead, the Irish were forced to basically rip up their entire playbook when it came to the line-out. After the game, Lock Joe McCarthy said they'd been resorting to making up some line-out calls on the fly, that they'd run out of options they could use, and it shows. Regularly kicking for touch, Australia handed them 23 line-outs, and yet any option where two pods are split apart was now off the table for Ireland, probably cutting their possible calls in half. Ireland were forced to use simple front or middle balls with two pods together, making them easy for Williams and Frost to read in turn. The Wallabies also prepped for this, deploying Harry Wilson superbly in the role that Peter O'Mahony used to run so brilliantly when Smith was with Ireland, just lobbed up at the front to be a nuisance as much as an actual threat, just to kind of get in the way and annoy them if they do go down that ball, and potentially put the hooker off the throw as well. And this led to some really smart ripostes from Ireland. This is a great move, baiting the tailgun lifter out only for the ball to fly over both their heads to McCarthy on an adjusted wraparound line. It's superb, but there were equal number disasters. This initially looks like an overthrow in the worst possible position, but apparently unclear on the call, both Doris and McCarthy go into lift and get in each other's way, preventing the jumper getting high enough to reach the on-target ball, which falls for the Wallabies. No team loves a multi-phase attack like Ireland, but with only one tiny line-out observation, Smith was able to drastically reduce not just the amount of balls his old boys had, but the quality they could play off. The team forced to run more conservative, slower plays to guarantee winning the thing, often at the back or in the middle and forming mauls. And yet it wasn't the only thing Schmidt disrupted beautifully this week, as he also managed to ruin Andy Farrell's website, and so Farrell headed to Squarespace. Frustrated the HTML site had been working on since his Wigan days had all fallen apart, Farrell was amazed to discover just how quickly Squarespace could build him a website at an equivalent level of beauty to the one that took him months of coding with just a handful of clicks, just like 12 or 13. All so easy to put together, he didn't even need to think, keeping his brain power instead on solving the line-out kerfuffle whilst building it to his exact specifications so easily. And with him off on lines duty in the coming days, he can bring on multiple collaborators so that Simon Easterby is able to create and post content on that website as he sees fit, including videos and diaries and all sorts as we head into 2025. And if you want to head into 2025 with your own utterly gorgeous website, you can do that by heading to the link in the description and using the offer code SquidRugby to save yourself some money on that website, which honestly, it'll be a good website. Good luck to you. However, this line-out strategy formed just part of a pretty complete, more holistic, Schmittian strategy to beat Ireland. With the number of passages of play reduced, and hence the tackle count lower, Australia were free to run a pretty taxing twist on their usual defence. The system was the same, but there was a different change in emphasis. This is probably the best example of the game. It begins with a smart, small moment from Kellaway, who had a brilliant game without the ball. Having been caught out by this set move to get Keenan on his outside in the opening minutes, eventually saved by a superb, sneaky hand from the winger, when Ireland run a similar play to get onto his outside, he breaks system and backtracks to cover, closing that space before leaping to his feet and contesting the breakdown, slowing it down immensely. This slow ball gives Australia time to set shape for something sort of brilliant. To just watch this through, right? Ireland ship it on repeatedly, their normal thing of getting through lots of pairs of hands, then Fraser McWright comes up with, out of nowhere, an absolutely brilliant turnover aided by Big Bobby V. But if we play it again and dig into more detail, it shows us just how the Wallabies went at Ireland all day. Prendergast hits Doris with McCarthy on his tip, and Frost and Valentini smash both of them, taking them beyond the ball backwards out of the game, if possible getting them to floor. Frost in particular making sure Doris stays hit. Archie in behind takes to the line, but Tupou in turn smashes him, allowing Wilson to just go low on Finlay Bealham, presenting the ball on a plate for McWright. Ireland baked 4 support clear-out options into that play, but because they like these short passes, because they try and change the point of focus all the time, Australia were able to take 3 of them out of the game, leaving Porter with a simple choice. Do I clear out Valentini? Do I clear out McWright? Because I can't get both. By the time the second green jersey is in town, it's too late. Jackal complete and penalty won by the absolutely phenomenal McWright. Honestly, right? Fraser McWright, best player on the pitch by a country mile. What a game he had. Ireland like to just put the ball through as many pairs of hands as possible, and Australia used that as a license to put those players on the deck. It's an exhausting tactic, but so effective. Over this passage, Australia defend 12 phases and managed to push Ireland back some 30 metres, and just watch how many times a previous passer is taken out as they pass the ball, or at least pulled away from their new ball carrier. It's over and over again. There's no turnover coming, but here Valentini bumps off Kelleher before before dropping Byrne to the deck. His opposite number tries to drag him down, but Bobby V goes, "No, I'm massive," and just carries on. Porter overruns his line and it forces Henshaw to carry, but McWright makes the tackle because of course he does, he was everywhere, and Big Bob can get over the ball to contest, prompting 2 extra Irish bodies in. Valentine here, right, has taken 4 players out of the attack to focus just on him, since none of them can reload open side in time. It leaves the Irish attack light, and Ireland are never sending a tight head into contact alone. It's a turnover risk, so Australia can ignore Clarkson here, and hence once Van der Fleer doesn't get the ball on this line, just push up and drift out, absolutely swarming Irish bodies and sending them backwards, because they don't have their usual options and bodies in motion. Defence is totally on top, and Ireland are forced into a series of desperation options, including a massive ball over the top, and then a moment later here, a pretty ropey kick by Prendergast, which nonetheless they do get away with and does work out. This whole passage eventually ends in a little bit of a poor pass by Byrne, leaving the Irish under immense pressure. A superb defensive set, all built on getting bodies out of the game so they can't rejoin the attack in that way they do, attacking the same areas over and over again with the same bodies, reducing the weapons in Ireland's arsenal every single phase, whether it's through huge concerted efforts like that or more simple beats like this. Calleja just gives Henderson a little push on the open side, meaning he can't reload to be on Byrne's support here, allowing McWright to lock over the ball and steal it. It's about getting players out the game. However, despite the obvious frustration Ireland will no doubt feel about this game and their match against Argentina, both just scraped home by 3 points against a side they'd have expected to put to bed with relative ease, I think this was ultimately a hugely positive outing and indeed autumn for Ireland. As in the New Zealand test, Ireland were shut down pretty well by the Wallabies, not as efficiently and well as the All Blacks did with the greater physicality and ability to force things via the scrum and so on, but still really bloody well. This left Ireland regularly frustrated, annoyed and wondering what was going wrong. But as fans in the stands turned to any player from any province but theirs, those guys on the pitch actually came together and just looked to solve the problem live. In just 2 weeks, we've seen Ireland's plan B come on enormously. And that B stands for boots. Lowe and Prendergast here are slightly disconnected. It's not a shit pass from Lowe as much as a timing issue between the two. The sort of thing you'll likely get playing such a precise system with someone new to this level and this team, but the moment they get some front foot ball again, Gibson Park just sticks it in the backfield, hitting touch. Or here, the moment that ultimately won the game. It's a low-key genius kick from Crowley on the front foot and just impossible for Wright to deal with, gifting Ireland the line-out from which they maul over the winning try. This time last year, the Irish kicked less than any other team in the World Cup. It was only a pure reset option, only used if things were going really wrong or they need to leave their own 22. If possible, they try rebooting the attack and getting back on the front foot first, playing 3 or 4 more phases before they kicked it away. But in the space of just 2 weeks since that All Blacks test, we've seen the speed at which the Irish fire the ball into the air or onto the turf bouncing behind come down by maybe 2 phases. This may not sound like a big deal or necessarily a good thing to some fans, but when faced with a well-set physical enough defence like South Africa and New Zealand gave them this year, Ireland would regularly run up semi-blind alleys and frequently found themselves forced into errors and turnovers. Andy Farrell talked post-game about how they need to bring down their error count. The quickest way to do that is by not putting yourself into situations where you can make them by making sure you kick the ball the second the defence gets on top. Ireland have got much better at doing that. There's been a lot of discourse around how Sam Prendergast played and whether he should have, but whilst he's obviously far from the finished article, and I think it's pretty daft to consider anyone but Crowley the first choice at the minute for Ireland, boy did he kick very well. He's generally played really rather well over these 2 tests and kicked extremely well at the weekend. His kicks down the line speak for themselves, but man alive, the boy can hang a bomb. This is an absolute beauty. There's a blind spot over Gordon's head, the scrum half totally unsure where it's going to be coming down. He instinctively just goes to run a blocking line, but remembers last second, oh god no, they outlawed this, I can't, creating just utter confusion and a clean chance for Australia to win the ball back. And in fact, it's another one of those bombs that ultimately leads to the try for Caelan Doris. Prendergast hanging it superbly between 2 Aussies, creating a small communication issue as Kellaway only comes onto it late and forcing them to come on sideways, not forwards, making the adjustment to jump more difficult, resulting in Keenan winning it. And from the penalty, shortly after, Ireland go down the line and run a lovely, very them move that just showcases how brilliantly Australia managed to shut them down over the rest of the game, because we see how brutal they can be when they get flowing. Byrne goes up and Ireland use a dummy maul to tie in Oz, preventing anyone gunning through on Gibson Park, allowing him to hit low, with Archie running a great dummy line. The winger fixes defensive captain Ikitau pretty completely, and while Swelly makes the tackle, this is is exactly the kind of thing Australia were trying to prevent by dropping bodies to the floor. Doris starts as a line-out lifter, but look how quickly he reloads onto the open side. Rugby can be a pretty simple game at times, and the Irish pack just beat Australia into the space. The initial move has sucked in all the backs bar Jorgensen and Wright, who are on the far extreme, and of the 9 players involved in the line-out, only Alatoa, Valentini and Gordon managed to fold onto the space in time, and they have to watch the fringe of the ruck, where Ireland managed to get 9 players in motion. With but a split second to react, Gordon makes the wrong read and works back inwards, whilst Valentini understandably watches just the ruck and the 2 guys in front of him, with one eye on Prendergast behind, just in case it goes out. He totally misses Doris, who picks his line beautifully. This is such an underrated skill, something Caelan Doris is so good at. He jogs slowly behind Prendergast. Huge work rate, but just folding out steadily and only accelerating after the pass has been given. He hides himself just completely. He's almost impossible to spot here. So many other moving parts drawing the eye away. Doris taking the thing and diving under the bar. When Ireland have maximum runners in motion, this is what they look like, and it's why it's so hard to defend. They're forcing you to beat them into a space you haven't even considered time after time. And a similar genesis to his fellow back rower's score, Josh van der Vlier's first half effort to get an out of sorts at the time Ireland back in touch. Having just been halted from a maul, Ireland return to the corner and go off the top instead, seeking to catch the Wallabies off guard. However, Valentini doesn't fall for it, and van der Vlier rushes his passer touch, forcing JGP to readjust, throwing the timing off ever so slightly, meaning the ball hits Doris's outside, slowing his charge and allowing 2 Aussie centres to wrap him up. However, this has pulled the Wallaby defence all out of sorts. Jorgensen, having been the first defender, tracks across now to fill in as a centre on this open side. He eyes up the situation and orders Valentini in one in case of a pick and go or a forward charge around the ruck, leaving him and Kellaway together defending a solid 10 metres either side of them, something Ireland identify right away as a mismatch this close to the line. Now, most teams here would do the traditional thing. Send the prop in Porter at the wingers, big man on smaller men to try and rumble that crucial final inch, but Ireland remain imbued by the spirit of Schmidt ball, where everyone is treated just as a rugby player. Hansen spots the situation and opts instead to fire himself in like a bullet at the gap, coming from outside the eye line, beyond the initial pod. At the gap, small and fast, trying to go between the cracks, and whilst Kellaway gets him to ground in time, as he rolls out the tackle, the Wallabies leave a gap for Kellaway to rejoin the front line, and van der Vlier, in turn, spots this, flying himself at the winger who's just getting himself back onto his feet and back on side, not helped by Jeremy Williams here stumbling around the ruck, trying to rush into position. Just as he did against New Zealand, it's a perfectly picked angle, targeting a guy getting back to his feet. Where Element had Smith's fingerprints, this line is pure Farrell. It's rugby league, forcing the same defender to make tackles over and over again until they drop off. Because, as is so often the way when Test rugby is at its best, this was 2 superb defences waiting for the other to crack so often. Ireland defended extremely well against a Wallaby side running plays that were so reminiscent of their own phase shapes, and yet Australia executed with a newfound confidence and patience, which I guess are the 2 main ingredients in belief. Max Jorgensen's opening try is one I believe the Wallabies probably wouldn't have scored a few months ago for numerous reasons. On the most basic level, just cohesion, knowing calls, shapes, understanding how each other play and how to execute Joe ball in that now trademark way that makes the most of their own individual skill sets, but there's a stage beyond that as well. After Suoli wins this in the air and Kellaway ends up stopped just inches short of the line by a great tackle by Prendergast, Lowe bounces back into the main line and so the Wallabies target him. Decent carry, wing and scrum off Gibson Park on the deck, and so 2 things happen. Number 1, Tom Wright runs this line on the blind side, spotting from space with Lowe on the floor. Keenan comes in to cover it, which forces Hansen into his fullback position to cover him. But Lowe and Prendergast also shit themselves watching Wright, knowing what a danger he is, with JGP on the floor, leaving 5 of the 7 Irish backs out of the game, just watching one guy in Tom Wright. Meanwhile, the ball instead goes to Rob Valentini, who has been having an outrageously world-classly good month, and also is enormous. And in response, the Islanders throw up 3 guys just on him, just on Valentini, who is going low and trying to get the ball to ground to generate a quick ball anyway. There's frankly no need, and good Wallaby support means it doesn't slow the ball down either. So Loliseo calls for it out, but instead they hit Slipper and everything sets behind him. It's fast ball and Loliseo drops a simple one off to Ikitau, and Suoli runs a beautiful dummy line to tie in Archie and Henshaw. The other 2 Irish backs now out of the game. Hansen has only just got back into line after wrapping around from covering fullback, so has no time to assess his options. He's kind of rabbit in the headlights, deer in the headlights. He's an animal in a headlight, and he's forced to cut in on Lolaseo without any time, who drops it off to right, adjusting his line. This loop is lovely and takes way too many players out of the game because they're all coming up static, unable to assess, do anything but move in reaction, no control of the play. In quite an inspired move, ever since the lineout, Ireland have left Tyg Byrne on the wing to cover or discourage the cross kick over Hansen's head, knowing he's a pretty short man and an animal in a headlight. But it means they've got to go with no idea how to defend this position. Right, getting it off in time to Jorgensen, who finishes out wide. It's a superb try, but if only two guys go in on Valentini, they probably have the same impact in the tackle, but everyone here can bounce out one, allowing Hansen to cover right and shutting this whole thing down. If only two players go in on right, they can bring one of these round to be outside Hansen and cover the space likewise. But instead, they don't. They bite in, and a trademark Sexton loop undoes Ireland in Dublin. Before their big wins over England and Wales, I think there's a decent chance Ireland don't shoot in this hard on Wright and Valentini. But reputation does funny things, and Australia have really earned theirs this tour. After a tough 2 years, a narrow loss might seem like more agony, but this was a hell of a performance. It's enormously to Ireland's credit they just held their own and found a way to win here. This was a huge game for them in terms of learning how to close out games where things aren't going their way, or the games they've traditionally fallen away in and lost, in the way they struggled against New Zealand and frankly also Argentina, which they felt much more in danger of losing. It's a massive step forward from a game management point of view, from an avoiding errors point of view, and from just understanding that this game plan, whilst incredibly effective, is now starting to be figured out, and they've got to get further ahead of the competition. But for Australia, this match was perhaps even bigger. The game where they went away to the team with the best home record in rugby against the number 2 side in the world, and so almost outshone them, outdid them at their own game. Ireland were very much the deserved victors, but from this match, much as the entire autumn, Australia are the story. I look at this team and see guys who could seriously compete at the Home World Cup in 2027. I see a team that might have a few bumps along the road, but is on the up and the up, heading into a Lions tour next year. Judging where the Wallabies are on the trajectory has been pretty tricky over the last year, but after this tour and its performance, it feels pretty clear to me. The boys down under are on their way so far up.
Thanks for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. And with that, my Autumn Nation series hoodie can go away for another year. That is the last video of the Autumn Nation series, so we do have something coming hopefully next week on one of the big trends that took place during this tournament. So there's more to come, but we are officially heading into Moments of the Year territory. It's going to be coming sometime around the 20th to 23rd that weekend, most likely the 23rd. If you have any moments you want to suggest last minute, please send them on, Blue Sky, on Instagram, on, email them if you like. We are getting very close. We're going to lock the list on Monday coming after the weekend's European Rugby and see where we are, because that is coming up very, very soon, as is Team of the Year shortly afterwards. There's loads going on, and we'll get into the Six Nations and everything beyond next week, next year even. There's loads more coming, but in the meantime, I want to thank you all on behalf of, I didn't say it, just says Autumn Nation Series, Rugby.
They go down, but they show a ton of heart. Next up,